Chapter 6. As Jack waited for Beth in the corridor outside the flat, he noticed Mrs. Roberts' door was open a crack. A pink slippered foot jutted out through the gap, and he glimpsed a wisp of gray hair and an eye peering at him. "Afternoon," he called. Couldn't he do anything without her interfering? Mrs. Roberts muttered something and slammed the door. Oops, she couldn't read his mind as well, could she? He didn't have time to dwell on that further, though, because Beth came bounding up the stairs. "Wow," she said as she nuzzled past him and entered the flat. "How many of you live here?" "Me and my mom. Why?" "It's so compact." Jack glanced around as if seeing the flat for the first time. The front door opened straight into the living room that had enough space for a sofa, armchair, and small TV stand. Scuff marks covered the dirty yellow paintwork. A gas fire clung to one wall, looking as if one tug would pull it off. Even when it was cold, Mom refused to switch it on, worried they'd die from lethal fumes. A wilting plant sat on a table under the burgundy curtains. Not enough light penetrated through the narrow window to keep it happy. A hallway off the living room led to the two pokey bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, diner, and a minute bathroom. Actually, bathroom was too grand a word to use for the cupboard crammed in between the bedrooms, housing a shower, toilet, and basin. Mom likes being in the city center, lots of people around. He grimaced as he took in the saggy old furniture. Even though Mom had hung a few pictures to cheer the place up, it was still grotty. But it was all they could afford. He'd never been able to call it home. It didn't feel like one. "We're renting it until Mom and Dad get back together," he continued. Why did he have the urge to apologize? "Then we'll buy somewhere." "You think they'll get back together?" Beth raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." He sounded defensive. The truth was, he didn't want to contemplate any other outcome. His mind flitted back to before Mom and Dad split up, to the overheard arguments, Mom calling Dad selfish and unreliable, Dad stomping around, slamming doors. All parents fought, didn't they? What bothered him more was Dad's disappearing act. Beth sauntered around looking at photos placed on top of the TV and picking up Mom's ornaments. Jack hovered next to her, not sure what to say or do. "What's a place like where you live?" he asked eventually, fed up with watching Beth inspect his belongings. "Oh, big house, huge garden, 8 kids. None my age, though." 8? He couldn't begin to imagine what it was like having so many brothers and sisters hanging around. "What can I say? Kathy and Pete love kids. I guess that's why they were happy to take me in." "But 8? I mean, that's not normal." "What's normal?" Beth stared at him. He stayed silent. He, of all people, couldn't answer that question. "I have to share a room with Mia." She frowned. "She's a pain, always looking through my stuff. It's hard to keep things private." She picked up a framed photo. "Is this you with your dad?" Jack nodded, pulling a face. He hated having his picture taken. Who'd want to be constantly reminded they resemble a slug? But Mom had sneaked up behind him as they'd walked in the woods near where they used to live. She'd called out his name, and he turned as she snapped the photo. His expression, half obscured by the hood of his jacket, was one of a questioning surprise. It had been one of the rare times Dad had gone with them. He had also turned towards the camera. The skin around his blue eyes crinkled as he laughed into the lens. Jack remembered how they'd ended up playing football in a field behind the woods as the sky darkened and the clouds gathered overhead. Eventually it started to rain and they'd got drenched running home. Dad had been chilled out that day, not in one of his moods. Life with Dad was like being on a roller coaster at times, with stomach turning ups and downs. "You look like him." She replaced the picture. "People used to say I look like my dad." Her shoulders stiffened for a moment before she relaxed them and sank into the battered armchair. Her black rucksack, which Jack had started to think must be superglued to her, was nestled between her feet. He fetched glasses of juice for them both from the kitchen and set them on the floor. "What's up?" said Beth, gazing at him with her black-rimmed eyes. "You've been itching to say something since I got here. I can tell. So spit it out." He hadn't realized it was so obvious. He told her what he'd found out about Dad. "I haven't time to wait for him to phone again in 2 weeks. My skin's a disaster zone." Beth sipped her juice. "Has he always been this useless?" He gave her a dirty look. "Dad wasn't useless. Well, maybe he was a little. Whenever away for work, he'd rarely phone, but that was because he got caught up in whatever he was working on. Wasn't it?" Beth stretched her back, flinging her arms into the air and yawning. "Perhaps he's so busy he's forgotten about you." Jack scowled, but a tiny part of him wondered if she had a point. "What was that old saying? Out of sight, out of mind? Have you tried phoning or emailing him?" "Look, I'm not stupid," he said, his voice rising in indignation. "He doesn't have a phone, and his email's not working. It bounces my messages back. It's like he's closed his account." He cleared his throat and swallowed. "The thing is, I'm no good at that investigating stuff. I'd like your help if you're still offering it, that is. Beth grinned. I thought you'd never ask. I haven't blown it then? Nah, it takes more than one knockback to put me off. Beth punched him lightly on the shoulder. Right, let's get to work. We should start with your aunt. She's the one who heard from your dad last. She's bound to know what's going on. Where does she live? Colford, he said, rubbing his chin, and I remember Mom saying once that Dad used to work near there. So it's a great place to start, she said. Have you been there before? I visited her during the Christmas holidays, but let's go there then. Can't we ring her? It's over 3 hours on the bus. If something's happened, she's not going to talk about it over the phone, is she? Face to face. That's the way to go. Trust me, said Beth. Come on. Wait! To Jack's astonishment, Beth had grabbed her rucksack and stood waiting for him by the door. We can't just leave. What about my mom and Kathy? We'll ring them when we get there. If we wait, it might be too late for you. Would your mom let you go if you asked? Even Kathy wouldn't, and she's really relaxed about me doing my own thing. Beth was right. Mom got extra anxious about him in summer months. Better to leave without her having the chance to say no to the trip. She was so brittle at the moment. One wrong word from him, and she'd snap like a dry twig. Kathy's away, said Beth, and Pete's so busy with the others he won't miss me for a while. It'll be cool. Don't worry. There's another problem, said Jack, putting his hand on the door to stop her rushing out. I can't travel during the day because of the sun. Oh. Beth plonked herself in a chair, looking dejected. She stared into space for a moment. Then she leaned forward and slapped her knees with her hands. We'll go tonight then. Right now, we can start making a list of questions to ask her. Like proper detectives. Got any paper? Reluctantly, he fetched a pad of paper and a pencil. He had the feeling Beth wasn't taking his predicament seriously. Do we need to write it down? I'm sure I'll know what to ask when I see Auntie Lil. But she had already started jotting something on the pad in a large, loopy writing. Jack peered over her shoulder. At the top, she had scribbled, The case of the missing dad. Why did you write that? It looks stupid. Okay, I'll cross that bit out. Beth put a line through it and underneath wrote a short list of questions. Does Auntie Lil know where your dad is? 2. Where is he? 3. How can we get a hold of him? There are 3 possible explanations. Either your dad's too busy to contact you, or he doesn't want to see you, or Beth raised both hands in the air and fluttered her fingers in a bad imitation of a ghost. Something sinister's happened to him. Whichever's right, you still need to find him urgently, correct? Jack shrugged. Beth was like a whirlwind, darting here and there, making snap decisions. Jack couldn't help wondering if involving her in all of this was such a great plan. But he'd asked for her help, and that was that. There was no going back now. And what else could he do? Sit around and wait for Dad to show up? He could be waiting a long time, and things had gone too far for that.